thighs, but the cycloid really isn't a replacement for the D-pad in my opinion. Now, with the introduction of the NES top loader, Nintendo redesigned the standard NES controller, nicknamed the dog bone. This thing was so close to being the perfect NES controller. The rounded edges, the nicer feeling D-pad, but they just had to angle the A and B buttons so only a lobster could hold it correctly. It just doesn't feel right. Nobody's hand normally rests like this on a controller. It's just uncomfortable. Well, since the original NES controller worked, many simply tried to copy it. The Sega Master System and TurboGrafx 16 controllers, while different in some ways, were basically just their version of the NES controller. Atari decided to barge into the party with their 7800 controller, and I'm pretty sure everybody stared at them until they released this instead. Only in Europe, though. In the US, we were treated to this, and over there they got this. Lucky them. Of course, Sega had to do something different with the Sega Master System's follow-up, so they brought out this 3-buttoned hunk. Anybody else ever realize just how big the Sega Genesis controller really is? Like, whoa. This guy has some meat on its bones, but weirdly enough, it only has the same amount of buttons as the NES controller. Like, it doesn't have a select button, so even though it has 3 face buttons, they both have 4 in total. That led to problems down the line when fighting games were coming over, which required more buttons, so Sega crammed some more in with the introduction of the 6-button controllers. Shove your hand between the couch cushions and you'll find various Sega Genesis controllers, each different from the last. Like, Sega released so many Genesis controller variants, it's crazy. They're all different in terms of design, button placement, D-pads, it's ridiculous. I interrupt your regularly scheduled me with an emergency report by me. Controllers made by other companies, not the console manufacturers themselves, are running rampant. And most are up to no good. This is the third-party controller watch list. Our mission statement is to bring more awareness to Here we have the TAC-50 joystick for your local Sega Genesis system. It falls in line with the rest of the, I guess if that's what you want sort of thing, controllers. It's not bad, but it doesn't necessarily work well with the vast majority of the Sega Genesis library. It does have these suction cups on its base, which makes it harder to move around on a coffee table, and it also looks pretty good on a windshield. The 6-button controllers are fine and good, but the 3-button one is the classic, the one my mind immediately shoots to when Genesis is on the mind, and it's a solid controller in its own right. It may be a bit bulky, but it feels good. However, it was completely outdone by the makers of Chibi Robo Ziplash.
A master interviewer makes more than conversation. They make moments. Talk is cheap, so we've got an hour of it. It's Attack of the Show, The Loop.
The SNES controller is magnificent. It may not be my favorite of all time, but it does so much so right. The buttons are lined up in this beautiful way where it's so comfortable to use your thumb to press the Y button with the rest of it resting on B, ready to use at a moment's notice. Excellent for games like Super Mario World or Mega Man X. Shoulder buttons came swinging in, L and R, with all buttons in the D-pad feeling exquisite. Couple that with the rounded shape, and this is something that dreams are made of. Atari, just go home. The Atari Jaguar brought back the classic number pad. I'm sure they looked at Sega combating Nintendo by adding more buttons to their controller and shrieked, "Yep, that's the next big craze, more than 12 buttons, the kids will love us." Next up, the original PlayStation came to be due to a failed partnership between Sony and Nintendo, which would focus on a CD add-on for the SNES. After that bust, Sony created their own console based on their knowledge from working with Nintendo, which is pretty obvious looking at the controller. I sometimes forget how similar the PlayStation and SNES controllers are. I mean, fundamentally, the only main differences are the D-pad, 2 sets of shoulder buttons, and thighs. That's it. However, the PlayStation controller finally became a man with the DualShock. Look at the size of these things. This redesign features meteor triggers, a rumble feature, and dual analog sticks. The rumble and analog were obviously responses to the Nintendo 64's controller, which came before it, and we'll get to that in due time. But the DualShock made dual sticks a standard. It also introduced clicking down on the sticks as an additional button input, which, can I say something here? R1, L1, R2, L2. These are shoulder buttons. It makes sense they're numbered like this. Why are these called R3 and L3? Anyways, I love the feel of the analog sticks. They're so smooth and the texture works so well. But what if the DualShock just isn't doing anything for you, and you hate happiness? Here's the Nintendo 64 controller. This came out after the original PlayStation controller and before the DualShock, and man, we can bark about this controller all we want, but gotta admit, this thing was innovative in so many ways. Controlling a game in 3D with the analog control stick, camera control, 4-player multiplayer being standard on the console, even the trigger on the back, give your finger a cock and BAM! This was a huge leap forward for the industry, yes, but answer me this. Just what the hell is this thing? 3 prongs make it so you have multiple ways to play multiple games. Maybe you can hold it like this, or even this. But that means not all the buttons are readily available to the player in any of the controller holding styles. Also, the stick is garbage. This thing is just a skinny, plastic, uncomfortable piece of work that wears out too easily. Now, the Nintendo 64 controller did a lot right. It introduced Rumble with the Rumble Pack accessory. The analog stick brought us games like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. And look at these colors. This thing is a colorblind Scott Wozniak's worst nightmare. Yep, I don't like this controller. Moving on, the Sega Saturn controller was pretty decent. Basically just an evolution of the Genesis 6-button ones with shoulder buttons this time around. But Sega also introduced the 3D control pad for a few games, specifically Nights into Dreams. And this controller leads us into its immediate successor on Sega's last home console, the Sega Dreamcast controller. Yep, I don't like this controller. Now, is this controller as bad as the Nintendo 64's? God, no. It actually has a layout that makes sense. But this stick is just not comfortable. This was still when many companies didn't realize that hard plastic on an analog stick isn't mankind's favorite thing out there. Also, why does the wire come out of the bottom? There's a groove for you to pop the cord in near the top, so that way it's pointing in the right direction, which just kind of comes off as a slight fix to a design oversight. At least the triggers were analog, which was a solid innovation. It definitely made racing games more realistic. But who could forget the VMU, the memory card with a screen displaying info or housing its own games to be played? But that, PlayStation's back, baby, with the PlayStation 2's all-new DualShock 2. This is the same controller, except the face buttons are now analog, which is dumb. Why do you need the triangle button to be pressure sensitive? Why? It felt like they just assumed analog inputs were the next big thing, but you don't need it for everything. Well, moving past that, we have the introduction of the Xbox brand, and with it, holy well, I can tell you first off, that was the easiest Easter egg hunt I've ever been a part of. This controller does get a number of things right. Number 1, giant Xbox logo. The Duke, as it's referred to now, is a behemoth. It's big for the sake of being big. There's no reason for it to be this way. Now it's completely usable, but it's just not that great when you get down to it. Like, what is this? Seriously. Also, the dual sticks just feel weird. Like, the left one has a large concave area, and the right one has a much smaller area, which honestly feels like it's convex. God, I need a shower. Microsoft designed a smaller controller for the Japanese market that made its way over to the States later down the line, and this is much more reasonable. I can actually get behind this one. It just feels much better. Everything actually makes sense this time. After Nintendo wouldn't stop laughing for 5 years straight, they really cleaned up their act with the GameCube controller. This thing is pure comfort. It just feels right in the hands. The button layout is definitely different compared to every other controller, and while I prefer the more traditional design, this layout makes a lot of sense. The main face button you'd probably use in most games is A, so why not have everything orbit around it? The triggers are crazy satisfying to click down, and the left stick is leagues better than the Nintendo 64 one. I love this controller, but while it's one of my favorites, it does have some gross parts. The D-pad and C-stick were made for ants, and the lack of another shoulder button is a bit odd. Regardless, the GameCube controller has definitely stood the test of time. These pesky wires, man, what is this, the year 2000? That's where the Wavebird comes in, a wireless variant of the controller. It uses radio frequency to transmit the wireless signal. Wireless controllers were around for a while, but most used IR, like a TV remote. You had to keep them pointed to the adapter for them to function properly. But all you had to do with the Wavebird was match up the dials on the controller and the adapter, and you're all set. While it wasn't the first wireless controller, I'd argue it's the first truly great one. You can go all around the room with it, and it works perfectly. The only main downside compared to going wired is that it doesn't include rumble and it takes batteries. Was the GameCube C-stick not small enough for you? Well, do I have a bad controller for you? Introducing the GameStop branded wireless GameCube controller. Too small and uncomfortable for any of you with hands out there. The analog stick keeps with the tried and true tradition of hard plastic to make sure you hate it even more, and the buttons reek of loud plastic cheap. Also, it's been reported that if you do touch a controller like this, you will most definitely contract bed bugs, damn it. Wireless was truly the next step for controllers. We make our way to the Xbox 360, which has one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time. I mean, there was nowhere to go but up after this thing, but everything is just so finely tuned and makes for a perfectly balanced controller. Minus the D-pad. Microsoft later released 360 controllers with this transforming D-pad where you can have it like a traditional one or go back to this garbage. Personally, I have no clue why you'd want anything other than the more traditional D-pad, but I don't care, this thing is fun to twiddle with. Next up, the PS3 control- Jesus Christ, guys, it's been over 10 years at this point and you still haven't moved on? To be fair, Sony was set to go with an all-new design for the PS3 standard controller. I've never been so happy to see this design come back. The 6-axis controller was there for the first few years of the PlayStation 3's life and was basically the DualShock again, but now wireless with motion control capabilities and no rumble. Sony later released a traditional DualShock 3, rumble and motion controls included. Now everything was going pretty smoothly with controllers at this point. The 360 really hit it out of the park, the PS3 was going with a time-tested design, and Nintendo... Yeah, the PS3 controller may have had some motion controls, but the Wii Remote full out embraced them. There are definitely things I love and hate about this controller. When it works, it really works. When it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. We only have a D-pad on the remote with a few buttons on the front and a trigger on the back. It may seem limiting, but the controller was smartly designed to be usable in a multitude of ways. Like a TV remote, on its side like an old school NES controller, with the nunchuck attachment that actually gives you a stick, or inside a countless supply of plastic. I really admire how creative they got with uses for the Wii Remote, but I'm not gonna lie and say this thing is a great controller. The sideways control method isn't my favorite. I'm just not a huge fan of this D-pad or these buttons. And like I said, the motion controls are definitely hit and miss. However, Nintendo did release the Wii Motion Plus add-on and the Wii Remote Plus to enhance the motion capabilities, and I gotta say with these, I'd say the Wii Remote is pretty alright. Motion is pretty accurate now, and when used properly, it can be a really fun controller. But if you're more into the traditional side of things, might I suggest the Wii Classic controllers? They plug into the bottom just like the nunchuck, and man, I forgot how decent these things really were. The original is quite derivative of a Super Nintendo controller, but includes some modern additions like two sticks that are way too close together, and buttons I like to refer to as, you call these triggers? There's also this mystery button on the top, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this was ever used and still don't know what use it was ever going to have. The original Classic controller was great for retro games, but a bit lackluster for more modern ones, so let's flip that around. Here's the Classic Controller Pro. It's much more akin to the PlayStation 2 controller and is great for some of the more hardcore Wii games out there. Nintendo then put the Wii Remote in Photoshop, gave it a little of this, a little of that, popped a screen in the middle, and blam, Wii U gamepad. It gets a bad rap. It's huge, unnecessary, and clunky. Listen, I'm with you on a lot of that, however, I found this controller to be wildly comfortable to use. The grips are nice and all the buttons and sticks are large and feel great. The problem is, this guy. The screen isn't the worst, but certainly not the best. And its use in some games was just annoying, and it led to one of the worst battery lives out there. The gamepad doesn't hold a charge well at all, so if you charge it up and don't use it for a week, chances are when you pick it back up, it's gonna be dead-zo. Also, you have to charge it via a separate power adapter, not the Wii U itself. And just so much garbage was thrown into this thing, I'm pretty sure you could survive in the wilderness for a week with just this. A camera, NFC, TV remote, knock it off. Almost none of that is needed. Except I will say the TV remote was pretty useful. Like with the Wii remote, if you're not into all of this, Nintendo offered a Pro Controller, and get ready Wii U Pro Controller Defense Force, I don't like this controller. It all has to do with the fact that the buttons are on the bottom. It's just so annoying and stupid. This format worked on the gamepad because it was so big. The buttons were placed in a perfectly usable location, but here, it just doesn't work for me. Also, the triggers feel weird, man. I think it's because they aren't analog, yet they're designed just like the 360s. Which are. The Wii U gamepads were these fat patios for you to click, and they felt good. These, not so much. At least this controller lasts up to 80 hours on a single charge, which is something the gamepad definitely can't say. However, both got on my bad side for having this gross glossy finish. Like, this looks good in pictures and for 2 seconds after you open the package. Anytime afterwards, welcome to Fingerprint Avenue. Now I don't own this thing anymore due to unforeseen circumstances. If I could sue a game controller, I would first go after whatever the hell this third-party Wii U controller is, and then sue the Wii remote for deception. But I do remember everything about it and how it was the definition of everything a falsely advertised product was. This controller was trying to scam people into thinking it was a Wii U Pro controller. However, it turns out it was fundamentally just a Wii remote and Wii Classic controller all in one. Now, the idea of having a standard controller with the capabilities of a Wii remote and Classic controller all in one is great. The problem was this controller was terrible at everything it did. The build quality was cheapo, the buttons felt like mashed potatoes. The only reason why anybody gave this controller any attention was the fact that there was a Super Nintendo and Super Famicom color scheme available.
This is why they don't let pseudo-Europeans who lived in China who come from Portland try.
The PS4 controller actually switched some things up compared to the PlayStation controllers of the past. They went for a new, more ergonomic design, and I think it worked out pretty well. There's this touch bar now, which I personally haven't found all too useful, a light bar, which just feels like an excuse for this controller to have battery life, and whoa, where did the start and select buttons go? Yeah, the PS4 was the start of something dreadful. The death of start and select. Instead, we got this share button, which is useful enough, I guess, sharing photos and videos of gameplay. But what the hell is this options garbage? Well, whatever. I do have to say that while the DualShock 4 is comfortable and a decent controller overall, there are a few problems with the build quality. I don't know, it's just the one controller I consistently have problems with, and I'm not alone with that. The Xbox One controller feels a bit like more of the same from the 360 controller, but with random tweaks and changes that feel both better and worse. Like, it feels more premium in some cases, but cheaper in others. It's a bit more compact and trying to look more modern than the 360s. I think the D-pad is better and the sticks have a more grippy surface to them. But I don't know, there's something a bit off about this design. Not bad by any means, but I think I still prefer the 360s. Also, am I the only one that thinks the replacements for Start and Select make no sense? What the hell is 2 boxes and 3 lines? That finally brings us to the Nintendo Switch's supply of controllers, the Joy-Con, the controllers that come packed in with the console. The Switch is an interesting situation. It had to have controllers that have to be on the console itself to enable handheld play, but be detachable to make use of a variety of different playstyles. God, these things are too small. Listen, I adore so much about the Joy-Con, but they're basically taking everything in modern controllers and cramming them into something you'd find in a dollhouse. I mean, these things have a lot going on in them. A full suite of buttons and sticks, new HD rumble, motion controls, NFC. They're perfectly usable, just not that great. I love the idea of how they were designed to be used as 2 separate controllers, but is this a way to live? The shoulder buttons for the individual Joy-Con are miserable, so much so that Nintendo supplies straps to slide on for better ones. Using them together is alright, however, they're still more akin to the Nintendo 3DS controls compared to most home console controllers. For me personally, I go for the Switch Pro controller. This thing is truly no nonsense, it gets right to the point. It uses a button and stick layout that makes me swoon. The texture of it all feels great, nice big meaty buttons, a solid battery life, all the technology from the Joy-Con. This is what you call a controller. I always keep the Joy-Con attached to the Switch for when I want to play portably, and keep the Pro controller on standby for home console use. And that is a basic history and review of most of the major video game controllers. We've gone through a lot, and while not all of it has been great, it's all led to where we are now. The inception of motion controls, the pause button, the introduction of analog control with the 1292 Advanced Programmable Video System. Jesus. Experience with number pads, trackballs, screens, these successes and failures helped us form some of the greatest game controllers out there. Don't immediately bat away new features and gimmicks introduced in controllers because they may be huge steps in the right direction for the industry. They may not be talked about as much as the games or consoles themselves, but they are some of the most important aspects of the video game industry. Well, let me know what your favorite or least favorite game controllers are, and if you'd excuse me, I have another, for real this time, meeting about video game related issues, this time on video game box art. You gotta be kidding me. Hey y'all, Scott here. Please, for the love of God, don't mind me. I'm just doing some touch-ups to my high school yearbook photo. You think they'd let me do retakes 9 years later? There's gotta be a grace period. I've been having trouble going to sleep thinking about what people thought of me back then, so hopefully this will change their minds. Okay, and we're done! I actually toned it down, I didn't want to get too late. Telling the truth. What are you, a bitch? Well, be honest about how your video game looks when you can just lie and deal with it when it's already bought. False advertising is how many companies roll. We've all seen those fast food comparison shots. This is what's advertised, and this is what I got. What the hell? Most of the time for marketing, they'll use something that represents the final product, but you do some color correction, adjust the lighting, tweak a few angles here and there, boom, good enough for air. And when it comes to video games, they are no stranger to catfishing. Why show actual gameplay in your ad when you can show something that's neither a game nor being played? It's way easier to disappoint players than to entice them with the truth. No matter what, false advertising is always gonna stick with gaming. It's been there since the very start and it will be there till the very end in 4 months. Advertisers know they could just show you what the actual game is gonna be like, or they could visualize what it will feel like. Garbage. Sometimes advertisements don't necessarily lie, but with the way they're set up, you come in with certain expectations. With the Mario Galaxy commercials and box art, I thought you could fly through space just like this to each of the galaxies. Instead, they just play a cutscene of Mario flying, and when you would fly in game, it would mostly just be an automated thing going from one place to another. You did get a power-up late in the game, the Red Star, and that let you freely fly for a decent amount of time, but it was only in one level and the hub world. I wanted to cream through space to all these levels like how this looked. And Super Mario Galaxy just ended up being my favorite game of all time. I'll take the single tier. This is kind of the mentality of a lot of old school box art. Box art in general is supposed to be an artistic representation of the game you're buying. Of course it shouldn't lie, but if you're waiting for an exact moment in the game to look just like the box art, well, that's a toughie. I don't think this ever happened in Title Legends. Obviously, these take and hyperbolize the best and most defining moments of the game to make for a great and appealing piece of art that also isn't misleading, which is a difficult thing to balance. Atari thought we were idiots. This isn't misleading because under the right mindset, the game will make you feel like this. Soul eating soap. You thought we were past this level of deception? Oh, no. See, many have noticed how box art has become more in line with what we expect out of our games these days, but the angst behind the Atari box art lives on in the form of trailers. We could show the product and get people excited, or we could not show the product and get people excited and pissed eventually. Hey, sometimes you just have to show something. And if that something isn't enough, America's biggest fear becomes a reality. The gamers will revolt. So it's obviously enticing to make your game look as appealing as possible in your big reveal trailer. It's okay to use a few scenes not actually in the game. Maybe put some CGI there for the sake of cinema. Maybe put that in. It's not in the game, but we can make it happen in the game, right? This is how legends are born. Dead Island is one of my go-to picks for deceiving trailers, and it's one of the best ones of all time. This incredible, emotional, 3-minute long cinematic masterpiece showing a family being attacked and losing their lives to a zombie outbreak, all played in reverse. There's so much you can analyze with this trailer. It put Dead Island on the map for so many players. This trailer was the first time I had even heard of the game. It really set the title up to be a gripping, emotional story of a zombie apocalypse and the emotional turmoil that ensues because of it. Here's the first thing you see putting the disc in.
Shrunken head, broken legs, body parts on the concrete.
Not saying Dead Island is a bad game at all, but the trailer and the game are two completely different beasts. The tone in the game is still fairly serious, but not as serious or emotionally gripping as the trailer would lead you to believe. These characters have nothing to do with the game, other than showing remnants of the outbreak as it first occurred on the island. The developer Techland even went into the game after the trailer came out to try to adjust the tone as much as possible to be more in line with it. But these still feel like two different things. It just shows how powerful marketing can be, making you want something you had no prior interest in. But this was a case of false advertising just because we let somebody talented make our trailer. Oops. Sometimes false advertising is very much deliberate as it sets you up for a massive shock while playing the game. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a prime example, as you think you'll just play as Snake the whole game. Nah, you're playing the rest of the game as this new character, Raiden. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Well, with the title literally involving the word remake, it sets you up to expect the story to basically follow the same steps as the original, also the entirety of the original. In reality, this was a lie. The Last of Us Part 2, on top of pulling the same Metal Gear Solid joke of, you thought you were playing as this character? Laugh. They also altered certain cutscenes for its trailers to make the character Joel look older in them, so that way, with viewers knowing he's aged, they were led to believe he was in more of the game than he really was, when in reality, they altered flashback scenes, made him look older, and put them in the trailer. See, I don't really consider that to be false advertising, at least in the more negative sense. Rather, it's leading players in another direction, or just not showing things to avoid spoilers. So it's just being an ass. But then we have just the flat out lies. Some of the most despicable, loathsome moments in the video game industry. The Simpsons game. This game had the audacity to say in its E3 2007 trailer it was releasing on every platform ever made.
Coming this fall to every platform ever made.
Oh, even the PSP? See, most people would assume that's a joke, but you forget to take into consideration most people. Some people genuinely thought this game was coming to all these platforms, so we had to re-release the trailer. The voiceover was the same, but the platforms showcased were... true. Well, I said it was ridiculous for anybody to assume the original trailer wasn't a joke. I think some of the platform choices were incredibly misleading. The Game Boy Advance and GameCube were still being supported at this time, so out of all platforms to put there as a joke, those are really odd choices considering I don't think it was too far-fetched to expect a Game Boy Advance or GameCube version in 2007. Or the VIC-20.
Our story began in Waterdeep, the city of splendors, with a group of scoundrels.
You'll be completely safe with me.
I really do love you, but that was absolutely disgusting.
box itself can be pretty deceitful sometimes. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on Wii U says it supports the Wii Remote and Nunchuck and Classic Controller and lying. This was just a misprint, but there was speculation in the early days of Breath of the Wild's development that it would allow players to use motion controls like with Skyward Sword on the Wii. Now, supporting one Wii Remote by itself, I think only the bravest speculated that. Doom on Sega Saturn says on the box that it's the original Doom in all of its glory when it's missing content. But then we have the flat-out disappointments. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Oh, this collector's edition comes with stones. I swear to God if they're just eggs. Not again. These have all been somewhat tolerable lies, though. I mean, if she's cheating on you, at least she's only doing it a little. Aliens Colonial Marines was such a massive cluster of garbage. Like, what the hell happened here? Gameplay demos shown were severely different from the final product, making the game look so much more sophisticated with good lighting, AI, animations, and severe attention to detail. But upon release, we only have a few options here. See, this was a massive downgrade, some areas of the game more so than others, but in the end, this was pure deceptive marketing. At E3 2012, the game was running on very specific work machines. This wasn't gonna work on the consoles at the time, but they made it still not work. While it's not unplayable, Colonial Marines was a huge disappointment and showcases how companies will pretty up a game for major gameplay demos to end up releasing something not nearly as groundbreaking. The intention definitely wasn't to win everybody over at E3 and then leave. These gameplay demos are supposed to represent what they want the game to be, and if it actually turns out that way, well, let's pray God's a fan. I mean, this demo looks like a fine-tuned PS4 Xbox One game, not a 360 title. It tricked millions into buying the game, thinking it would be this, when in reality, it was nothing but a shell of that. Watch Dogs suffered a similar, though not a severe fate, where it too looked light years better via the gameplay demo than in its final state. This was definitely because it was revealed quite early in the project's life. They didn't have to take hardware limitations into account nearly as much at this time compared to when you're finalizing everything about the game. And when it got to that point, I mean, the game still looks fine, but that E3 gameplay demo was beyond impressive. Watch Dogs at release was a somewhat buggy, generic modern Ubisoft game, and not much more than that. No Man's Sky was a huge letdown for many, with the promise of basically having an infinite amount of worlds to travel to in space. Of course, the ones they decided to showcase at E3 were the only ones of note. The game was supposed to feature procedurally generated worlds, and when you would land on one, it was truly you discovering it, but in reality, the game launched as a boring experience where there was nothing to do, and the worlds weren't impressive. They didn't look as graphically decent as they did during the marketing push, and they all just felt like variations of each other, nothing of note. Now, Watch Dogs wasn't the biggest downgrade. It was still a decent game, and No Man's Sky got a ton of updates, and at this point, it's pretty okay and does a better job living up to what was initially promised. Aliens was one of the worst cases of this, deliberately making a better looking gameplay demo before releasing. Gameplay demos are supposed to be more trustworthy than trailers. That's the point of them. The trailers use CG cutscenes and cuts between them in gameplay all the time. The gameplay demo is supposed to show you what you're gonna get, because trailers can be incredibly misleading. The Killzone 2 trailer infamously was all CGI, even though it was animated in a way to make the viewers think it was all gameplay. See, this was right before the PlayStation 3 was coming out, and that was a time when we thought anything was possible on these consoles. If anybody could resurrect Christ, it would be the PS3. So many assumed they weren't lying. This was gameplay. Now, Killzone 2 still looked quite good when it released, but the people who made this trailer, they're still going to hell. Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2009 on Wii. The commercial used Xbox 360 footage of the game with a Wii Remote pointer. How did they think that would fly? EA explained the Wii footage wouldn't look good on a TV, so they used the HD footage from the 360 version and put the Wii Remote pointer in there, and bam, that's a sin. But one game decided to do something innovative, be the biggest example of false advertising of all time. Yeah, I'm not really saying anything that hasn't already been said here. Smallpox, they stink. But when talking about false advertising in gaming, we can't avoid the piss stain on my Xbox collection. Cyberpunk 2077 was developed by CD Projekt Red, a developer highly regarded for their work on the Witcher series and their commitment to consumer-friendly practices. I mean, The Witcher 3 was a huge hit, but even before that release, they announced they'd be working on a game based on the Cyberpunk series of tabletop RPGs. This was in 1964. Announced in 2012, then getting its first trailer in 2013, and then its next trailer 5 years later. In reality, the game was nowhere near starting full-on development, and it took until The Witcher 3's final expansion released in 2016 for the team to actually start work, and when this gameplay demo was fully revealed in 2018, jaws were dropped. This was such a detailed world with people walking around who have legitimate lives to live. If you would follow just one around, you would see them go about their day, go to their job, go home, and every single decision of yours would come back to bite you in the ass. And this is all without saying, the game looked stunning. Just absolutely beautiful models and settings. The animations were amazing. It looked like the most advanced video game of all time. And guess what? After being delayed numerous times, Cyberpunk launched in a state that, well, the main issues stem from the console versions. The PC version looked, ran, and worked the best, but it still was a far cry from that initial gameplay reveal. Most of the issues boiled down to how glitchy and unpolished the game could be at times, but at its core, I'll stand by the fact it's a good game. The world is really what sells it. It's so detailed and feels like a genuine lived-in place, and being in a dystopian future, it's truly a world worth exploring and looking at every little minute thing. But everything around it just doesn't feel all too special. The gameplay isn't anything groundbreaking. It's a first-person open-world RPG involving shooting and driving segments, and none of this is bad, but it just isn't anything I haven't seen before. Anything that they talked about in the gameplay demo, like how advanced the non-playable characters are, you just see them walking in a circle, going up to them and hitting the talk button, and they say one of like 3 repeated phrases to you. The same goes for the characters more integral to the story. They'll repeat some voice lines, which is fine, that's understandable, but this isn't the genre-defining game they made it out to be. It's a brilliantly designed world inside a game that feels like it's from 2013. Glitches were abundant, and we're just talking about the PC version here. On Xbox One and PlayStation 4, not only were glitches even more all over the place, but the game ran like piss, and that doesn't run well. Choppy frame rates, low resolution, the game would freeze and crash constantly, and this was the product of a giant marketing campaign pushed by investors and higher-ups who didn't understand how game development worked. They wanted a 2020 release date, which by the time CD Projekt Red started development would have given them less time to finish than The Witcher 3. And this project was so much more advanced with elements they've never worked with before. It just felt like a lot of choices they made didn't add up. Like, why do we have all this customization for our character, but the game is almost exclusively played in the first person and you barely ever see your character? Why push all this money into marketing and showing a demo of a game that frankly didn't exist yet? Much like other examples given, this demo was basically what the developers were told to shoot for, not what the game was, and no matter how much the developers said they needed more time or this wasn't possible, the marketing pushed Cyberpunk that much more. Like, did they really have to announce, hey, the game is finished, when the developer said, bullshit it is? Cyberpunk 2077 is a good game. It may not be for everybody, but to act like at its core this isn't a well-crafted experience, I think is a bit much. But you can't blame people for thinking that after such a disastrous launch and being lied to constantly. This was a case of a developer who was known for their goodwill and how players adored them, and higher-ups taking advantage of that. It's crazy to me how much these companies feel the need to lie when they know that it'll just come back to bite them in the ass. They take first impressions more seriously than launch impressions sometimes, but is it really worth all the headaches? To go through lawsuits and refunds and to lose consumer trust, all to impress people at E3 with something you know damn well can't be accomplished? Well, for some people it is. That's why lying is so popular. Fix a problem now, deal with the repercussions later, instead of telling the truth and causing some potential disappointment, but then you don't have to deal with bigger problems a year from now. It's just sometimes marketing takes over projects, and a lot of marketers don't care. Their job is to get people interested, and even if it turns out to be over lies, well, that's more publicity for the project. I guarantee you, more people have talked about Cyberpunk and Aliens Colonial Marines and No Man's Sky because they were disasters compared to if they were as good as they were made out to be. And if regardless of if discussion is positive or negative, it's still getting the name out there, which means false advertising for games will never go away. Game studios are constantly pressured into pushing boundaries, and I feel like they look at what they're currently capable of, no matter how advanced, and think it's not good enough. So they pretty things up for reveals and just assume they'll get it working later. But as we can see, that's not the greatest risk to take. I think the lesson to be learned here is it's okay to be excited. It's also okay to be skeptical, but maybe wait to make a full decision until something's out in the world and actual people are playing the game rather than snake people. Because liars are everywhere. They might even be staring you in the face. And this was when I lost credibility.
I'm Austin Show, and this is Name Your Prize.
Oh my gosh, I've had it with that.
You're gonna want this gong, I'm telling you.
I don't want the.
How else are we gonna brand the show?
Hey all, Scott here. I hate walls. Why do I live here? Have you ever realized there's a reason for these things to exist? That's right, you haven't, because there isn't any. But for some reason, the wall companies have a monopoly on console video games. It's just the reality we live in now, the way God intended. Super Nintendo cartridges must be played indoors.
Yeah, that's right, God.
You know what was the coolest thing ever? Playing a game in an environment you couldn't normally play that game in.
This is incredible!
I'm talking taking games you can only play on the TV from a home console that only worked when plugged into an electrical socket and making them playable on the go. See, I loved my Game Boy Advance, but whenever I'd pick up a game for the handheld that also released for the GameCube, for some reason, I would think, oh my god, it'll be just like playing the GameCube game on the go! Oh, this is rich. In reality, it was almost always a completely different game. Portable consoles just couldn't keep up with the homegrown stuff. To be fair, a lot of home console games would eventually make it to handhelds, but they would generally be pretty old by the time they did. But that didn't stop me from wanting Super Mario Galaxy and Smash Bros. Brawl playable on my Nintendo DS. I mean, they put Super Mario 64 on the system to take the game that defined what 3D gaming would be, the game that may quite possibly be the biggest leap forward in gaming history, and make it portable. It's still a spectacle to behold. Taking things that always required to be plugged in at all times to be stationary in your home and giving you the option to take them on the go, that will always be a magical feeling. And while many games that appeared on home consoles eventually made their way to handhelds, No. I want to play the Super Nintendo version of this game, not the Game Boy Advance version of the Super Nintendo version. Look at this, it's kinda different. I don't want a portable device capable of playing versions of Super Nintendo games. I want a portable Super Nintendo. The idea of taking a home console and cramming it into something the size of a Game Boy has been around for quite a while. Sure, you could just buy the Game Boy version of that NES game, but wouldn't you rather play the NES game on the go? That was the mentality behind some of the first major home consoles to go, the Turbo Express and Sega Nomad. And with these, we can finally stay outside forever and still play console games. No looking back! The Turbo Express was a portable TurboGrafx 16. You could play the exact same game cards, though you couldn't play the games released for the console CD add-on. Now, I don't own a Turbo Express because I spent all my money on not this, but I do have a Sega Nomad. Could you tell? Yeah, this is the size of a concerning growth. It's definitely not the slimmest portable out there, but come on, considering it was released in 1995 and is a full-blown portable Sega Genesis, I think it's fairly understandable how big it is. Hell, a Sega Genesis cartridge alone is the size of a Game Boy Pocket. Of course the system's gonna be bulky. So to play this on the go, we're gonna need a battery pack. Damn it. Alright, I'll go inside just this once to try this thing out. After that, never again. I have to plug it into a power outlet, which at that point you may ask, what's the point of playing Genesis games on this when I could just play them on a TV? It doesn't matter, because look, I'm playing Sonic 1, but it stinks now! Playing with the battery pack would require 6 AA batteries, and they'd be drained in around 2 to 3 hours. That, or there was a rechargeable option, but overall, not the greatest battery life, and installing a battery pack would make this thing nearly impossible to shove into a pocket. Not being able to put a Sega Nomad in my pocket is my worst nightmare. But in practice, honestly, the Nomad is far better than I ever expected it to be. It plays Sega Genesis games. It is an official Sega Genesis after all. The screen was always what I heard the most horror stories about, how it didn't age that well. And yeah, I think the biggest problem is how blurry it can get, but it's way better than many made it out to be. It's still fairly playable. And now games like Sonic, it may be a bit fast for, it gets a bit too blurry, but something like Streets of Rage works fairly well. You can adjust the brightness, which helps a ton, and you can even output the Nomad to a TV as well as connect another controller. This truly is a Sega Genesis on the go. You just can't attach any of the add-ons like the Sega CD or Sega 32X. I mean, who cares? What, was I really gonna play Fahrenheit on the go? Yeah, the Nomad's pretty impressive all things considered. I mean, say what you will about the battery life and screen quality, but it's a portable Sega Genesis from 1995. That's crazy.
But what if we want a little more power with a lot less compromises? Well, say hello to the PS1 LCD monitor, a way to play your favorite PlayStation games on a portable LCD screen as long as you're connected
One more trip inside and we can play our PS1 games portably. Released alongside the revised PlayStation model was a screen you'd attach with a couple of quarters, plug in and bam! It's honestly incredibly simple, and the screen and sound quality is excellent. I love how there's no extra wires, it just plugs in on the back, you plug in an AC adapter and you're playing any PlayStation game you can think of on a mini screen. Now, of course, this isn't completely portable, you need to be plugged into an outlet at all times, but it makes bringing the system around places far easier. You can bring this to a hotel, a cottage, hell, you can get a car AC adapter and play this on the road. The screen attachment business started to start here. I mean, here's a third-party one for the GameCube, same general idea, but not nearly as well made, simply because the GameCube wasn't designed to work with something like this, the PS1 was. So we have this fun skin growth thing where we have to attach it here and attach this. I think I'm missing a piece. But I recall seeing all these screen cases for your Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 or Xbox One or PlayStation 4 where it's fundamentally a carrying case with a TV screen built inside. This way your child doesn't have to go, God forbid, a minute talking to people at grandma's. They can just bring their system with them, plug in somewhere, and keep the good times rolling. I mean, I'm guilty of this. Whenever traveling as a kid, I'd always pack up a portable DVD player in season 3 and 4 of Wings. I'd totally be set for not talking to anybody on a trip. God, these cases are overkill. I understand wanting to play your console games on the go, but this isn't that far off from just bringing a TV with you places. Look, come on, nobody wants to lug this around when this offers just as much entertainment. It's just kind of cool to be able to play non-portable games portably, but when that involves carrying around a 50-pound sack, the magic is gone pretty quickly.
See, but these things aren't necessarily portable. They allow you to play your favorite consoles in the corner of your bedroom rather than on the living room TV. What about stuff more in line with the Turbo Express and the Sega Nomad? Well, those things have existence on the menu tonight.
See, the technology required to make something along the lines of a Super Nintendo, yeah, more affordable and compact by the 2010s, definitely more than possible to take that and turn it into a somewhat affordable portable. That's how we got the Superboy by Hyperkin. Let's turn it on. Jeez, I can't see the screen. The sun's too bright.
Son of a bitch!
So the Superboy was released in 2011 and is basically the SNES version of the Sega Nomad. I love how it looks, it's just like a Super Nintendo controller. We pop in a cartridge and bam, we're playing Super Nintendo games on the go. Sometimes. It may be because I bought this used, but it's a bit finicky and doesn't work properly all the time. The D-pad feels a lot cheaper and more plasticky than the official Nintendo made one, but I mean, this is one of the more legitimate ways to play the official cartridges on the go. But if you really want to play Super Nintendo games on the go, I'm not really sure if you care all too much about authenticity. At this point, you might as well download these games on the 3DS or something. Similarly, we've got the Retro Duo Portable, also built to play SNES games. And the design isn't nearly as charming. It looks like the most generic possible design for video game controller with a screen. But it comes with an adapter to play NES games. Portably, yeah, portably. That reminds me, if you want to play Game Boy games portably, just attach the Super Game Boy to either one of these handhelds, and there you have it. The Retro Duo Portable actually had a fair amount of adapters made for it, so you can play games from all kinds of systems. I'd say if you wanted to play these console games on the go, this one is your best bet. But Hyperkin's still releasing new iterations of the Superboy. This one was the original release. The later models use a widescreen display that stretches out the games. Why? What was the point of this? No Super Nintendo games were widescreen. I get widescreen displays are more readily available than 4x3 displays right now, but why couldn't they have programmed these things to not stretch the games out to fill the screen? God, I am pissed at this thing I don't own. Well, if you just want a portable NES, there's this guy right here, the FC Mobile 2. Look at all this stuff it comes with. Controllers, a gun. Screen's the size of a grape. I mean, it works, but I think it's too small. Like, the screen is minuscule. An NES cartridge is twice the size of this device. I don't see any reason to try to make this as compact as possible so you can fit it in your pocket if in your other pocket you have to store NES carts in it. The sound's really rough and blown out. It just feels a bit too cheap for my liking. But if you really just have to play these games on the go, it works. Though it also smells weird, but I don't know if that's really a point to make talking about video games. So these modern retro console handhelds. They're neat, but I don't see them as anything more than a novelty. Like I said, for people that just absolutely have to play video games via the original cartridges, the retro gaming purists, wouldn't they prefer playing these on a CRT with the best picture quality possible with the original controllers and unofficially made hardware and whatnot? It's still amazing to play these games via the original cartridges in the palm of your hands. I mean, that's just pretty neat. But many of these aren't the most well put together, like opening up the Superboy cartridge flap are Are those wires supposed to be that visible? Jostling the systems a bit will cause glitches or freeze the games, and plus these cartridges are so big, I can't see anybody actively thinking, finally, I can play these games portably. These cards were not meant to be taken on the road, and these systems are nothing more than a neat little thing. But what if we take more modern systems and make portables out of them? To finally be able to play GameCube and Wii games outside, oh my god, that's the dream! Well, let's talk about these portable consoles we can play outside, but not play them because I don't have them. Look at these, portable homemade GameCubes and Wiis. These are literally dreams come true. Exactly what I wanted as a kid. And these are all fan-made. You need to have an extensive knowledge on how to turn this thing into this thing. I'm telling you, I would have killed for something like this. Sure, Mario 64 DS was great, but playing either of its successors, Sunshine or Galaxy, on the go? Oh. But alas, if you want a portable N64, GameCube, or Wii, you're gonna have to shell out the big bones or have a good idea of what the hell you're doing if you want to put one together. If you want to be more straightforward with this kind of stuff, obviously you could just wait until your favorite console games get remade or ported onto handheld systems. Donkey Kong Country Returns came to the 3DS, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came to the PlayStation Vita. Sure, these are downgraded in some ways, but literally all of these portable solutions are downgraded in some ways. Yeah, the screen's smaller, the controls may be weird, it's always gonna be different. Of course, that begs the question, what about a console that, right out of the box, can be taken on the go with you? That's right. I'm talking the Wii U. You can plug your Wii U console into a power adapter and it'll still connect to the gamepad if it's close enough. That means for Wii U games you can play directly on the gamepad screen, they're about as portable as the PS1 with the LCD monitor. All you need to do is plug the Wii U in and that's it. It'll still stream video to the gamepad screen with no internet connection, nothing. I've seen dozens of people playing it at the airport or in the car. Maybe less than dozens, but still, it's possible. In the end, home console gaming, while incredible to be seen anywhere but the home, it seems like it's a bit too tailor-made for the TV. Many games like this were made to be played sitting on a couch, connected to the internet at all times, and taking advantage of the horsepower you can achieve with a fat box, not having to take a screen and battery life into consideration. Maybe console gaming was just never meant to be played on the go. Oh. Well, that's a look at console gaming on the go. See, a lot of these things are actually pretty cool, but they have a lot of roadblocks involved, though I'm willing to look past a lot of them. With these portable home consoles, I never have to go indoors ever again! I still believe that. Look what just happened. Can't rain indoors, the outside's amazing. That's right, f*** you, house.
Everybody good? Yeah, great. I mean, obviously, huge show this week. Before we get into everything, I just want to make sure everybody had a chance to solve today's Wordle.
Of course.
No. Obvious. Okay.
I used a VPN to do it twice.
Nice. Attaboy. Gina?
Hey, what's up? You did the Wordle, right? Does it matter?
Let's save the fun and creative for the show discussion, but the Wordle.
Kevin, it's like 9 a.m. Who does something that early?
That's the point, so no one spoils it for you.
We all know that because
we all did it! Right, Gina?
Yeah, guys, of course I did it.
So,
I love Wordzol.
Gina, what's the word?
Which one?
The Wordzol, today's word.
Everywhere solves for the same daily word. That's why it's so fun.
Which you would know. Because you did it, right, Gina?
Yeah. Guys, I told you, I did it.
What's the word?
It was Cranston.
No! That's the wrong word, Gina.
You need to do it right now.
You think we can talk about some dumb show when there's an unsolved Wordle a mere inches away?
Gina! Load it up, come on.
Is it an app?
Load Safari! The website is so simple.
powerlanguage.co.uk/Wordle. Okay, here. I don't know, drink. Oh, hey! First guess! I did it! Look! Is it bad? Did I break it? What's...
A queen!
Chosen one. Chosen one. Chosen one. Chosen.
First guessers are usually cheaters and witches, but we witnessed the miracle. We saw it with our own eyes.
Happy to do your bidding. I shall kill for you.
Okay. Hey guys, just to let you know, Wordle sucks and nobody's into it anymore, and we're all playing something called Buggle now.
Oh, thank God.
I hate Wordzol.
I hate this game.
Okay,
Alexa.
y'all, Scott here. Oh, to buy video games right now, I have to leave my room. Now I could always buy video games online on Amazon or just straight digitally, but come on. I need video games now, not in 1 to 2 days considering shipping and handling, and I love plastic shells. Who wants to do this? So that means driving 10 minutes to a brick and mortar store to buy physical games equals, fine, I'll go to GameStop. The video game store used to be a magical place as a kid. It was always something I looked forward to. I didn't even have to walk out with a new game or anything. Just browsing the games available and being surrounded by them was a treat. And when you did buy a new game, oh man, you pop that bad boy open on the road home to get a taste of what's in store. What does the disc look like? Reading through the manual, waft the wonderful smell of a freshly opened game. Sometimes that experience was more memorable than the actual game you bought. Before a trip to GameStop, I would rummage through the games I had and said, okay, I don't need this, this, or this. Bring them all there, get some sweet, sweet trading credit, and pick up some new games. Of course, now I hate this punk for selling his Game Boy Player for a copy of Just Dance 3, but back then, without a job, trading in games was just the way of life. Game stores were the place back then for me, but now what the hell happened here? I really wish video game stores could be more of a place to just kind of hang out and browse games, maybe even play them, but instead, whenever I go, I'm bombarded by my favorite question in all of retail.
What brings you in today?
I always follow that up with a just looking around, browse the games until I realize the pop figures take up more space than the Wii U section, and then leave empty-handed. Well, maybe I can learn to love video game stores again by working at one. My interview is, right now.
Hi, Chet Shaft, Game on a Shelf Manager.
Hi, Scott Wozniak, Games on a Shelf Employee to Be.
So, what makes you want to work at Games on a Shelf?
Well, I love plastic, and discs are great too.
You know, we're really looking for somebody who's into all different types of games. Are you that kind of guy?
I don't give a piss didn't do much for me, but it really didn't excite me. The title never interested me. Didn't look all too entertaining. I wasn't interested. Doesn't appeal to my taste. Doesn't really appeal to me. Not super into mobile games, a way that makes me not care at all. I'm not an RPG guy, and I'm not a Xenoblade guy. I'm not really into it at all.
I like the Wii.
Perfect, you're hired.
Personally, in terms of going to actual stores for video games, I prefer Best Buy. It's nice and big, you walk in there and browse the games without getting harassed by employees about joining a membership or pre-ordering games or whatever. At the very most, one will ask if you need help with anything or just say hi, and that's about it. However, they did have a sweet membership. Gamers Club Unlocked gave you 20% off all new games. Not new as in recently released, new as in basically any game on the shelf. It was only $30 for 2 years. That right there basically made Best Buy the only place I'd consider picking up games at. They don't offer the program anymore because holy how could they sustain a deal like that? To be fair, the 20% off games got me to buy a lot of non-video game stuff there, but I mean, 20% is still a lot off of products Best Buy already doesn't see a ton of profit from. Even without the membership, I just like Best Buy because I can pick up the game, bring it to the counter, bada bing, bada boom, I'm out of there. Places like Walmart and Target, oh god, those have got to be the bottom of the barrel in terms of my preferred game stores. Who the hell wants to wrangle up an employee and beg them to unchain Detective Pikachu for you? All the games are behind this glass door and you have to get an employee to unlock it for you, and it feels like whenever I actually want something, there's never anyone around to unlock it. You just kind of have to pace around until you see somebody. But of course, why go to those places when you can go to, GameStop is the definitive place to buy games for many people. It's simple. It's a game store. You go there to buy video games. I notice it's really popular with families. A mom will usually bring their kid there to pick out a game or to ask questions about something. But wow, GameStop can be annoying. I'm not trying to boycott them or say anybody who works there is a chump. No. It's good to have a store specific to video games, and I know for a fact most employees are perfectly fine people just trying to do a good job. And they're forced by their bosses to do all this annoying stuff, such as trying to cram a membership down your throat. They really like to push the Power Up Rewards program. It's just a standard membership. It's really not the craziest in the world. You get slight discounts on used games, some little benefits here and there, but that's about it. It comes with a subscription to Game Informer magazine, and they always ask if I want the digital or print version of Game Informer, and I'm like, I don't want Game Informer, I want the 70 cents off Darksiders 2!
You gotta be ruthless out there. You can't dance around them getting the membership card. Remember, you're not out there to make a friend. You're out there to make a sale. No manners, no subtlety.
Join our membership, Ed. At least you get fun prizes for all the points you accumulate on the membership, which you can claim on this website. Oh my god, this place is barren. Anybody else remember going on the Power Up Rewards site and seeing all the different prizes you could redeem? It was always stuff like a Call of Duty beanie or whatever, but now it's just gift cards. I mean, it's whatever. When I used the site more often, the only rewards I picked were the gift cards, even when they had other trinkets available, so I don't really care. Now, one thing GameStop has over all other major retailers who sell games are the used games and trade-ins. Others have tried. I can't even finish that. They all failed. Like Walmart sells used video games. What? GameStop is universally known for selling used games at a cheaper price than new. Sometimes. GameStop's used game selection is always a mixed bag for me. First off, I'm not super big into the fact most of the DS games get their cases thrown away. I get it, the cases take up valuable space, but I don't know about anybody else, but if a game comes in a plastic DVD-like case, I need the case for it. I ain't buying it loose. This bugs me about a lot of used game stores in general, GameStop included, of course, but it feels like they never put any effort into cleaning games. Many of the cases for GameStop's used games are just gross. How did it get this way? So they didn't have a standard PS4 case for this game, but for some reason they had the original game cover art, and on top of that, the battle scars this thing has taken is just too much to stomach. Most of the time, if they don't have the original box and cover art, GameStop just prints their own and uses a generic case. I mean, it's better than nothing. At least the GameStop cover art for Mario Tennis Ultra Smash is better than the actual game. Is there legitimately anybody out there who will buy the game with the GameStop cover when a copy with the original cover is available? Just curious. It's obvious GameStop likes to push used games. With new games, they don't make much of a profit off of them. Used games, non-stop profit. They buy a game off of you for like 20 bucks and sell it for 55. It's genius. The trading credit has always been a big problem for many. Like, here's how much a used copy of Spider-Man costs, and here's how much you'd get for trading it in. I mean, that bites, especially if you don't have a ton of money to spend on games. A lot of people definitely complain about trading credit, but I will say a lot of people complain for all the wrong reasons. I think too many people assume that they should get a ton of money for their garbage game nobody cares about anymore. Think about it for a second. Why are you trading in that game? It's because you don't want it anymore. Well, millions of other people didn't want Gears of War 3 anymore either. That's why it's only worth $1 and you get 25 cents for trading it in.
Hey man, listen, corporate makes us do this every year, but this is just a little manager evaluation form. You just fill it out, let them know how I'm doing, you know.
All right. Is your manager manipulative?
I'd say no to that if I were you. Hey, looks like we got some trade-ins coming in. Knock them dead.
All right, total trade-in value is gonna be $10.50.
Well, I got this Skylanders for the Wii U. How much is it now?
$10.48. Of course, you could just sell your game on eBay, but that requires a lot more work, and there's no guarantee it'll sell. GameStop will accept your game right then and there and give you at least some money for it. Not a lot, but since it's way less work for you than an eBay sale, I think it's fair to expect not a ton of money from trade-ins. It is convenient to have a well-known store that'll buy your used games, but this is still kind of ridiculous. Oh, you know another thing I hate about used games? These stickers are the worst. You may be able to peel them off perfectly one time, but just you wait until you get a stubborn one, and it is brutal. GameStop used to spank the stickers on the box art itself, not the plastic case. Major problem with that can ruin the art. At least on the box, if the sticker doesn't peel off correctly, you can just slap some Goo Gone on it or use a different case, but this isn't nearly as easy to get off of the art. And for some reason, GameStop likes to sell new games that aren't new. Like I bought Shenmue 1 and 2 for the PS4, and I bought a new copy. The problem was it was the last copy on the shelf, so they put a disc in the shelf copy, and there we go. I bought a new game that was open and unsealed. I didn't pay the used price, I still had to pay the new price. That's fun. They usually run deals like 4 for $20 on specific used games, and those specific used games are generally all-time classics like Disney Infinity 2.0 Game Only, MLB The Show 14, and Fling Smash. But my main problem with GameStop always boils down to the fact that they won't stop trying to sell me something. Hey, do you have anything you want to pre-order? They ask me as I'm trying to buy Chicken Shoot on the Wii. Hey, the usual, right? One copy of Wii Play Motion to go.
Thanks, Chief. We gotta start pushing pre-orders more. Studies show that 9 out of 10 gamers play video games. We gotta capitalize on that market. Next customer you get, do not stop talking about pre-orders.
Pre-orders, am I right? It's like totally like you buy one S. It's just like most of the time if I tell them I'm not interested in pre-orders, they'll list off a bunch of upcoming games and be like, interested now? And I'm like, I'm sorry man, I just want Chicken Shoot, just ring it up. I'll just casually browse games and a GameStop employee comes up and asks me for my membership info just to remind me of the points I have and to pre-order things. Listen, I love to talk to anybody who works at GameStop, as long as they don't make it so obvious they're just trying to sell me something. I've had a few perfectly decent conversations with some GameStop employees and they've been delightful. They don't necessarily nudge me to buy anything I don't want, get any protection plan, pre-order anything, become a pro member, nothing. Just talking about games we like and ending things off with a solid take it easy. But 80% of the time at GameStop, all of this gets shoved in my face. And to reiterate, this mainly isn't pissing all over the employees themselves, because I know the heads of GameStop force them to act like this. The exact same heads that have turned GameStop into What is this place? This doesn't feel like GameStop anymore. The random merchandise takes up more space than the actual games now. It feels like I'm living inside of a loot crate. Nerf guns, toys, plushes. Many of them aren't even themed to gaming franchises, just standard geeky movie or comic book stuff. Now, I have no doubt this stuff is popular, but in terms of at GameStop itself, I have never seen anybody buy these knickknacks here. In fact, a lot of the time I see this kind of stuff in their clearance bins. At least it's better than when GameStop tried to shift their focus to smartphones. Yeah, that worked out for them. Now, of course, I may be saying this because of that virgin blood within me, but I think it would be smart for GameStop to start focusing a lot more on retro games. Now, they carry them online and at select locations, but come on, retro gaming is really big now, especially the GameCube, PS2, and Xbox generation. The kids who grew up with those consoles are at an age where they want to play them again, and instead of capitalizing on that, they're just gonna keep selling Naruto shirts. I hate the fact that retro games are mainly only available online. These are games you'd probably want to inspect before buying, but instead just buy them online. You'll find out if they come with the case and manual when you get them. I don't hate GameStop, but it's just not my preferred place to shop. It has annoying quirks, and as time goes on, the store just seems like it's becoming more and more not for me. I'd really recommend supporting independent mom and pop game stores. A lot of these places rock. They may give you better trading credits. They'll definitely have a bigger variety of systems and games spanning across so many more generations, and they probably won't be as in your face about junk you don't want. Better start supporting them soon though, because many of them keep on shutting down, and that's never fun.
Well, it's over. New store opened down the street. Some really steep competition. We just can't keep up with them.
I mean, I've had 5 people ask if we sell cigarettes. Maybe we should start taking trade-ins.
You think you know how to run a business? I know a guy with a NASA shirt, okay? I earned this job!
This is my peak.
Well, after everything I've been through, I'm done. I'm not going to game stores anymore. I'll say it's because I'm protesting them, but it's really because I'm unemployed.
Attack is back, and the critics are raving. Good enough. I've seen worse. Reverse hair loss now with one simple trick. Click here. Catch the show the critics literally won't start talking about. Attack of the Show on G4 Select.
Hey all, Scott here. 9 steps ago, I wanted to experience hardships and indigestion. But then I discovered this 9-step plan on how to successfully fail in the video game industry. And now I'm finally broke and depressed. So now it's time to spread that bankruptcy to you. Here's how to successfully fail as a video game studio. First off, please take a look at this. Yeah, I my pants too. This is some scary stuff. We want to do this, but fail.
So maybe if we eliminate the N's, the T, the E, the D, the O, and throw in some A's, some C's, an L, and an M, well, son of a bitch, we have ourselves a role model. The video game industry can be tough stuff. These things take so much time, money, and manpower to put together. If one game a developer makes doesn't meet expectations, it could be enough to sink the whole ship. Because of that, many publishers believe new releases have to be strategically crafted and well thought out in order to make the most money possible. In-game purchases and microtransactions, day one DLC, collector's editions, gold editions, they will take any opportunity to milk the most out of people's excitement for a new game. It must be exhausting. Like, think about it, would you really want to be a video game company? I tried being Activision once and it was hard. Nobody liked me, I was too scary, and I laid off over 800 people. It was the worst Halloween ever. But sometimes, even after layoffs and cost cutting, some studios don't make it far past that and get shut down, experiencing the worst fate possible, having the same company status as Acclaim. For some reason, it doesn't feel like Acclaim is gone. Now, that's a name that just screams video games. It's one of the first publishers outside of the main ones these days that I think of when the whole concept of video game company is brought up, and I don't know why. They were never a particularly great company. They published a few NBA Jams, the first two Burnout games, Turok, some console versions of Mortal Kombat, and a whole lot of licensed games. They filed for bankruptcy in 2004, and what do you know, we haven't melted yet, so I guess Acclaim's existence isn't vital to our lives, but it's still hard to believe they haven't been around for that long. They're just an unforgettable name in the industry, just like Midway. Their name is tossed around a decent amount for a dead company, and that's because Warner Brothers bought up their assets after they went bankrupt in 2009 and still used their name for re-releases of their old arcade titles. With these two companies, their names are some of the bigger ones from gaming history, but looking at them both, it's pretty easy to see where things went wrong. Midway found most of its success in the arcades back in the 80s and 90s, so in my opinion, while mismanagement and poor decisions can be blamed for their bankruptcy, when they were forced to compete in the console market, it seemed like they were having a tough time trying to keep up with the competition. They had Mortal Kombat, but not much else. Acclaim was just never really that great overall, so when standards of quality with video games went up, their profits went down. In retrospect, the death of a video game studio is pretty understandable and easily explained, but sometimes their demise comes out of nowhere. They just randomly get shut down, and that's always varying degrees of depressing. Even then, I'd say the idea of Atari becoming defunct has lost all meaning. Every time I open up the fridge, there's an article about Atari being bought or going bankrupt. This Atari, yeah, not the same as this one, or this one. The name has gotten traded around for years, so while Atari is still in existence, it has next to nothing to do with the Atari everybody knows from the 70s and 80s. This current Atari used to be Infogrames. Talk about a name I've seen hundreds of times but know nothing about. This looks like they wanted to call themselves Info Games. That name was already taken, so they went, yeah! Infogrames acquired Hasbro, which acquired Atari earlier, which they then renamed themselves to. Jesus. Hasbro Interactive's gone too, man. Who else is gonna make the Game of Life for PC in 1998? But that's just what happens a lot of the time. Many game developers and publishers are no more, but live on because of mergers or acquisitions. Sometimes meaning the studio still exists, just now with a different name. Remember Namco? Remember Bandai? Why not merge the two together? Now we have Namco Bandai Games, which then got changed to Bandai Namco Games, which then got changed to Bandai Namco Entertainment. Thank God they changed that 3 times. Squaresoft and Enix, both well known for Japanese RPGs, merged to become Square Enix. Konami acquired Hudson Soft and basically just absorbed it into the whole company later down the line, killing off the name. Well, I mean, at least one of Hudson's franchises lived on after the merger. That just shows that sometimes a studio is no more just due to restructuring. Nintendo EAD was the development studio behind mainline Mario, Zelda, Animal Crossing, all the primary Nintendo games, and they no longer exist. Well, that's just because Nintendo restructured their development studios by merging Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development and Nintendo Software Planning and Development into one in-house studio, Nintendo Entertainment Planning and Development, Nintendo EPD. Now, when a studio is acquired by a bigger company, that must mean that studio is safe from being shut down, right? What are you, stupid? It is heartbreaking and frustrating to see a studio get bought out or started up just to make a few games and then get shut down a few years later. And it's something that happens shockingly frequently. Bizarre Creations made Blur and Geometry Wars, shut down by Activision. Lionhead Studios made the Fable series, shut down by Microsoft. Capcom Vancouver made the Dead Rising game, shut down by, Capcom. Guerrilla Cambridge made Killzone Mercenary, shut down by Sony. Blackbox made Skate and Need for Speed games, shut down by EA. Maxis Emeryville made The Sims and SimCity, shut down by EA. Visceral Games made Dead Space, shut down by EA. You see a pattern here? It's just, why even buy these studios if you have them make a few games and then shut them down and lay off employees? These are giant corporations always looking for new employment. Surely they could have relocated a lot of these employees to other subsidiaries they own. Like, most of the time, a studio is shut down when the games they made underperformed and they're no longer profitable, but that's not really a good majority of the employees' fault, so why not relocate them elsewhere in the company? But sure, everything happens for a reason. A lot of studios end up getting merged. The studios that got shut down were because the games they were making weren't selling. The parent company didn't see much worth with keeping them around. I get that. It's incredibly sad to see a company that made legitimately good games close down and to see employees get laid off. That's never fun to see, but these companies are trying to run a business. Most of the time, I doubt the CEOs say, "Man, I'm just dying to shut that studio down today." The studio shutdowns are mostly done for strategical reasons. These companies are businesses at the end of the day, and sometimes they have to make tough calls that negatively affect a lot of people. It's sad, but it has to happen sometimes. There's that, and then there's Activision laying off 800 employees to cut costs when the CEO makes $30 million a year. What the hell? So it's pretty easy to fail at succeeding in the video game industry, so let's dive into a few key examples of studios that succeeded at failing. Disney Interactive Studios was one that just kind of shut down out of nowhere, and it hit me hard. I love Disney Magic Artist Studio on the PC. Of course, they primarily made Disney-related games, and they also dabbled in the pure market, but their last major project was Disney Infinity, developed by Avalanche. This was a part of the whole Toys to Life trend Skylanders started, where you buy toy figures you can scan into the game. But Disney Infinity used figures of pre-established Disney, Marvel, and Star Wars icons, which you'd think would translate to a bigger success. Well, it was a big success, but not big enough for Disney, because by Disney Infinity 3.0, Disney announced they were abruptly canceling the line of games and figures. This obviously wasn't a long time coming, because plans for a fourth game and new figures in general were already being developed. Of course, Disney is a smart corporation. I think they could see that Toys to Life was a dying fad, and it was smart to pull out of it before they had a flop on their hands with Disney Infinity 4.0. It was a dying market. Why try to make more money from it and have a bunch of unsold figures and games on your hand? And after canceling the future of the Disney Infinity franchise, they closed the entirety of Disney Interactive Studios just to really stick it to us. Disney Interactive suffered major losses over the years, and while Disney Infinity was enough of a success to help the division stay afloat, the writing was on the wall that Toys to Life was fading away, and with a future without Disney Infinity, Disney Interactive didn't have a reason to exist in the company's eyes. Why develop their own games when they could just license their brands out to video game publishers like EA? That was a great idea. That's actually the same reasoning behind Disney closing LucasArts down. They bought out Lucasfilm in late 2012 and then closed their video game division in April of 2013, laying off a good chunk of employees. LucasArts made some of the most beloved adventure games out there, with some big names in the pipeline at the time like Star Wars 1313. And to just see that all go away almost immediately after being bought out was disheartening to fans. The reasoning for shutting LucasArts down was simply because Disney found the prospect of licensing out their IPs to other game developers to be more appealing. That was a great idea. Speaking of LucasArts and their adventure games, a company that was seen as the modern equivalent to them also happens to be one of the biggest company shutdowns in recent memory. Telltale Games. Now, these guys have been around for a while. I initially heard of them when it was announced they were making Back to the Future the game in 2010. It was a point-and-click adventure game that basically acted like a fourth Back to the Future movie. They were mostly known for doing stuff like that, taking well-established media franchises and turning them into episodic, story-based adventure games. They worked on a bunch of titles, but really hit the big time in 2012. Telltale's The Walking Dead was a monumental success critically and commercially. It told a great story, popularized the episodic release strategy, rejuvenated the story-based graphic adventure genre, and it came out at the height of the Walking Dead franchise's popularity, which definitely helped things out. Everything was in this game's favor. Telltale really had The Walking Dead to thank for its mainstream success, and also eventual demise. They just picked up too many projects and pumped out too many games in such short periods of time. Yet ever since 2012, their games never really improved since The Walking Dead. They really didn't evolve along with the industry and instead just kept doing what worked back in 2012. Episodic story-based adventure games based on popular media franchises. They would generally have 3 series running at the same time each and every year, which was just a bit much for most to keep up with. The formula was showing fatigue and oversaturation, and in late 2018 it was announced that Telltale would be closing down, right when they were in the middle of releasing the final season of The Walking Dead and had a fair amount of upcoming projects in the works. At least Skybound Games came in to finish up the final season of The Walking Dead, but it's still sad to see Telltale gone. The closure really came out of nowhere for me. I wasn't expecting it at all, but when I actually thought about it for a second, it made too much sense. Like, I remember everybody playing The Walking Dead when that came out, and a few of their other games after that were pretty big, but by 2018, I just didn't hear anybody really talking about Telltale's games. They truly made some great stuff, but when it was obvious that they had to change things to keep up with the industry, it was too late. However, I'd make the argument that one of the most famous downfalls of a company was the
Our Our story began in Waterdeep, the city of splendors, with a group of scoundrels.
You'll be completely safe with me.
I really do love you, but that was absolutely disgusting.
When I think THQ, I think licensed games for the GameCube. Some good, some bad, most completely mediocre, but still a worthwhile presence in the industry. When it came to the original franchises, they had Saints Row, Destroy All Humans, The Blob, Darksiders. Good stuff definitely, just not the biggest names. But they did have licenses for Pixar and Nickelodeon games for a while, so that kinda made up for the lack of notoriety. Like I said, the GameCube era was really when THQ was firing at all cylinders. Licensed kids games were pretty popular back then. During the Xbox 360, PS3, and Wii era though, that's when they started to struggle, and that was partially because THQ said, you know what Nintendo's gonna do in 2 years? Yeah, let's fail before they do. The U-Draw tablet, released in 2010, it was a drawing tablet for the Wii, a pretty solid idea overall, but I think THQ really poured too much into this one. They could've gone away with just the tablet and the drawing software bundled in. But no, they made a bunch of games that required this thing. I never really thought the U-Draw tablet was worthy of being an accessory that should be mandatory for certain games. Like, that's something Nintendo does for their own console with stuff like the Wii Balance Board or Motion Plus. You really think THQ was able to do that themselves? U-Draw games were mostly licensed kids titles, and I feel like a lot of parents that just wanted to give their kids some Kung Fu Panda 2 action on the Wii were disappointed when they realized, oh, we need this third-party drawing tablet from some failing company. But really, the U-Draw problem started coming in at full force when THQ decided to release it for the PS3 and Xbox 360, yikes. Put this sign up anywhere, you'll scare somebody. While the U-Draw tablet on the Wii did okay, the other consoles flopped hard. U-Draw wasn't a big enough success in my opinion to warrant spreading it to other consoles that primarily attracted an entirely different audience compared to the Wii. This tablet was one of the biggest contributions to THQ's bankruptcy, but other factors were definitely still at play here. Licensed kids games were starting to become less and less of a thing. Like, just think about how many there were on previous consoles compared to the Xbox 360 onwards. Especially a few years ago on modern platforms. Like, without Acclaim and THQ pumping out movie tie-in games, it made Activision releasing some garbage Ghostbusters game really stick out. If I had to guess why licensed games aren't as prevalent now, it may be due to development costs being pretty expensive for HD consoles. But we have been seeing more tie-in games recently, and oh my god, I think they found a way to avoid high development costs, and it's to not have development costs. It's genius. But licensed games were THQ's bread and butter, so when those weren't doing well, they tried to buckle down and focus on more mature hardcore titles. It didn't really work out because most of their games were just pretty average. Sure, stuff like Darksiders and Saints Row have their fans, but when they were mainly banking on the game Homefront to save them from shutting down, I think that shows THQ without the tie-in games wasn't really much at all. They filed for bankruptcy in early 2013, auctioning off their assets. Games in development like South Park: The Stick of Truth were bought up by Ubisoft, and franchises like the WWE series were bought by 2K. Currently though, THQ is back in some form. Nordic Games originally bought up the majority of THQ's original franchises, and later in 2016 bought the THQ name and now operate under THQ Nordic just because the name THQ is still pretty iconic, especially compared to the name Nordic Games. Their entire game plan seems to be to acquire every single B-tier game franchise ever conceived. THQ Nordic will probably acquire the state of Nevada soon. When a game company goes under, It blows. Tons of people lose their job, games may be canceled, franchises are in limbo. It's never a good thing when a solid studio goes out of business. At least there's potential that franchises will be bought out by other better companies, employees will get new better jobs incredibly quickly, or the studio will be merged with a bigger one and nothing really changes outside of the studio's name. While everything happens for a reason, a game company shutting down is always one of the sadder things to read in the news.
And there you go. Listen to me talk for 13 minutes with step 1 of our 9-step plan. We only have 8 more to go until this bankruptcy meter goes even further down. I can't go through with this. We need to make money quick. We're selling soup now. It always works.
Hey y'all, Scott here. I've rediscovered one of my core talents, owning a Sharpie. Should have patented this when I had the chance. Portable video games, allowing you to play games in inappropriate situations. They make loitering a whole lot less obvious and give you something to do at funerals. Thank God for their existence. What would I do on the bus without them? Human? No, they didn't make Wario Land 4 for me to talk to people, I have to play it. Portable gaming seems like it was only a possibility long after gaming in general started to gain traction, but in reality, while video games started to become a consumer product in the late 60s, early 70s, portable electronic game devices started appearing by the mid-70s with stuff like Mattel Auto Race. Every timeline starts with Mattel Auto Race. Ever since, the idea of playing video games on the go has been just as prevalent as playing video games in general. Portability definitely forces graphical capabilities to take a hit, but that doesn't make handheld gaming any less amazing. These devices let me not talk to people. And the company most known for portable gaming is without a doubt Nintendo. Did you think I was gonna say Folgers? The Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, Nintendo 3DS, Nintendo Switch all have been leaders of the dedicated handheld market and have cemented Nintendo as the portable game company for the past 3 decades. Whenever a new company enters the ring, all they say is, that's cute. They strike a balance between affordability and horsepower they deem as good enough. They may not put out the most technologically advanced systems, but they more than make up for it with their library of games and asking price alone. It's weird to think Nintendo's best successes come from their portable business, but whenever they dangle nostalgia in front of our faces, it's mostly for their home console stuff. You don't see them talk about Super Mario Land 2 as much as Super Mario Bros. 2, even when Land 2 was actually more successful. I assume it's because home console games age better than handheld ones. I just find it odd because when you look at their history, Nintendo's bread and butter has always been portable games, evidenced by the fact that their first big success in the video game market was just that. The Game & Watch wasn't Nintendo's first foray into video games, but it was their first major success in video games, and it all started back in 1980. Humanity must have been really bored before that. Game & Watch was a series of handheld games produced by Nintendo, but you already know that. What was my last paragraph about? Prior to the mid-60s, Nintendo was primarily into playing cards it is. Starting out as a playing card company, then moving on to taxis justifiably, Nintendo dipped their toes into various markets until settling on toys due to the ingenious of one of their employees, Gunpei Yokoi. He designed the Ultra Hand, a toy where the fun lies with what you can grab with it. This toy's success led Nintendo to focusing mostly on fun and games from 1966 onward, and with the inception of video games being a thing, they obviously had to take a whack at it. In 1975, they released EVR Race into arcades. I've spit games more iconic than that. Well, EVR Race might not have lit the world on fire, but that's okay. Nintendo followed it up with Shooting Trainer. We're 0 for 2 at this point. That's where Skyhawk comes into the picture. I would tell you the impact it left, but I got a letter from everybody. Best way to put it, Nintendo's video game ventures in the 1970s weren't all failures. Some of them did pretty well. For example, the Color TV game systems were released, fundamentally dedicated Pong machine, selling a couple million units combined. Some arcade games did pretty well, but at the end of the day, none of them were really runaway successes, and nothing left much of an impact. But Gunpei Yokoi struck again, as one day he noticed a businessman fiddling around with a calculator on the train out of sheer boredom. Surely more could be done than just spelling words on a display like this. Because of this very moment, Yokoi devised a pocket-sized device that could play a game while also being useful in other ways, like acting as a clock. And with that, he would design the next video game product of Nintendo's. Its name? Well, I know what Nintendo would name bread now. The first Game & Watch unit hit store shelves on April 28th, 1980, titled Ball in Japan, but here in North America it was labeled as Toss Up. In fact, the initial North American release wasn't called Game & Watch at all. This was before Nintendo had much of a presence outside of Japan, so they worked with a distributor who labeled the units as Timeout games. See, I gave this name but at least it's upfront about what you're getting. What kid wants to play a Timeout? Ball is a pretty basic game and set the standard for what you could expect out of a typical Game & Watch release. First off, the build quality is phenomenal. This thing feels like a fine piece of jewelry, like an antique pocket watch. There's this feeling of elegance with them, and I'm not really hyperbolizing here. They never felt cheap or just like little games to keep the kids busy. You can tell they designed these with that businessman on the train in mind. These don't look out of place in a grown man's hand comparative to a child's. Game & Watch games were truly made for everybody. A couple watch batteries later and we're in business. We have Game A and Game B to choose from. Game A is all about juggling 2 balls at once. This is lame hell. Game B is much faster with 1 ball thrown in the picture. This is neat hell. It's pretty obvious Game B is way more fun. Now, fun enough to never turn off, that's tricky. These games don't have an on and off switch. They last quite a long time. You could go anywhere from 6 months to a year on just one set of batteries from light to heavy use. This is obviously because of the watch portion of the unit. You don't really turn off clocks, but just because I can see this game in standby mode all the time, I feel like I'm doing something wrong by not turning it off. It's just puzzling. They went, the battery life is great and it has a clock. We don't need an off switch. We can set the time. There it is. I'm done.
I'm going to show you an item that I bought online, and whoever guesses closest wins points.
I want that welding hat.
If I could see this on one of you guys, let's get our next product in here.
There goes its head. It's going live to G4 TV.
Surprisingly, there's not much to a video game made out of a calculator screen. Pretty much all Game & Watch games were simple high-score based ROMs. These were games of endurance, see how long you can go for. I, for one, find it interesting how much they can get out of such simple technology. There's only so much you can do with these LCD screens in terms of making interactive video game experiences, but they truly thought outside the box with these games and made very enjoyable time killers. Now, Nintendo kept releasing new Game & Watch units consistently for the next few years and would regularly release them in new waves and series. The first series was the Silver Series. The games inside were all different, but the shell containing them looked pretty similar across all of them. Some may have had different control layouts, but they were all pretty much the same shtick as the game Ball. The next series to follow was the Gold Series. Guess what the difference was? After the Gold Series was the Widescreen Series. Again, take a shot in the dark. All of the games produced under the first 3 series had nearly identical builds though. They were all rectangles with rectangles in the rectangles. That wasn't until the next series, the Multi-Screen Series. Alright, first one to answer wins. What does this remind you of? A clam! It's pretty obvious the multi-screen Game & Watch units were the inspiration for what would become the Nintendo DS, not only because of the dual screens, but the clamshell design. On top of that, these units were the first time Nintendo utilized their traditional D-pad to move a character in one of 8 directions. And if we want to extend these plagiarism allegations even further, various DS games utilize the system on its side like a book, and what do we have here? You son of a bitch plagiarist, what if they notice? A revised widescreen lineup was released later, and tabletop Game & Watches were the hot new thing in 1983. These were obviously responses to Coleco's tabletop line of mini arcades, and to me, they sort of missed the point of the original Game & Watch units. They're so bulky and not nearly as classy as the other ones. You whip this out at a funeral, you're gonna be the life of the party. Well, at this point, Nintendo was trying to innovate with the Game & Watch brand, and with each new series, they were trying to one-up the last, evident by the Panorama series. It uses a mirror to project color over overlays onto the LCD graphics, so you get more detailed visuals. The Super Color series followed and had just straight up color visuals. The Micro Versus series were multiplayer Game & Watch units with 2 detachable controllers. The Crystal Screen series had a see-through transparent screen. If the Game & Watch kept going after this, I'm sure we would have seen one that told us we were pretty. Yeah, there were a lot more types of Game & Watch than I initially thought, but the older series would still get new releases even when new series were announced. I mean, the final original Game & Watch release in 1991, Mario the Juggler, was a part of the new widescreen series, which got its start in 1982. Watching these games being played doesn't do them justice, because this looks really lame. You really have to get these in your hands to fully appreciate them. I have a couple of them in my collection and they're great. Once Nintendo actually started releasing character-based video games that were hits, they were sure to release Game & Watch units starring those same characters. Of course, we got some Donkey Kong ones. Here I have Donkey Kong 2. What? This is the only game called Donkey Kong 2. Of course, the sequel to the original Donkey Kong was Donkey Kong Jr., and then they moved right on over to Donkey Kong 3. The Game & Watch game decided to cut the bullshit because this is by all accounts heavily inspired by Donkey Kong Jr. in the arcades. This is pretty much just a renamed version of Donkey Kong Jr. But they already made a Donkey Kong Jr. Game & Watch before this. What the hell is this thing? You know I had to own at least one multi-screen unit, and yeah, the resemblance is uncanny. It has this soft lock lid to it that stops the screen from flopping out at random, I guess, which does remind me of the official Game Boy cartridge cases. I never knew there were so many different ways to rip yourself off. And finally, boxing, one of the Micro Versus units. This is cool. It comes in a chunky box and you can play by yourself or another player by extracting the control pads. Come on, this is amazing. Now this was re-released as Punch-Out in North America after the NES title experienced tons of success, but boxing and Punch-Out Game & Watches are the exact same outside of the title being changed. Nintendo released roughly 60 unique Game & Watch games from 1980 to 1991, and while they vary in terms of themes and gameplay, they all have that Game & Watch feel to them. There were a ton of LCD games throughout the years from companies like Mattel and Tiger, and on the surface, there's not much different between a Game & Watch game and any other LCD game, but it's the replayability and, weirdly enough, the graphical style of these things that make them stand out. I know some might be asking, what graphical style? There's something oddly charming about the graphics here. They have such a distinct style to them. You barely see any detail on these characters, but their expressions, the way they move, and how they would convey so much in such little graphics. It honestly impresses me how much character Nintendo was able to inject into single-screen games that have more in common with a calculator than anything else. Nintendo created a lot of Game & Watch games with generic names and setups. The themes and style remind me a lot of animation from the 1920s and 30s. Fire, bounce the people from the burning building to safety. Manhole, cover up the holes for people to walk over. Greenhouse, exterminate the bugs before they get to your plants. Many of these games have the same shtick. You have to juggle multiple things at once until you screw up. But they're still kind of addictive. Once you start playing a Game & Watch game, I mean, yeah, you're not gonna play it for hours on end, but I guarantee you'll keep playing until you lose. Nintendo repurposed many of their IPs that were successful throughout the 80s as Game & Watch units. Donkey Kong, Mario, Zelda, and they got the license to do games based on Disney properties, Snoopy, Popeye. They pretty much did everything they could with this brand back then. Over 43 million combined were sold. It's obvious to say the Game & Watch did pretty well. But of course, when was the last Game & Watch released? That's right, not yesterday, so why did they stop making them? I always hated that thing. It didn't have Snoopy Tennis. While these did well, they obviously had their limitations. There's only so much you can do with this type of screen. Pretty much all the graphics that could possibly be displayed needed to fit on this one screen. You couldn't make different types of games outside of endurance rounds. Nintendo released the Game Boy in 1989. That used different game cartridges and weren't limited to this. They were full video game experiences. The screen could scroll! The Game & Watch didn't serve much of a purpose with the Game Boy taking off. Sure, buying one was cheaper than a Game Boy, but it was obvious the Game Boy was the better investment. Now, other companies, specifically Tiger Electronics, carried on the LCD game legacy throughout the 90s. These were terrible. Nintendo knew what LCD games were capable of, and for sure what they weren't. They never really tried to make Game & Watch games something they weren't. They tailor-made them to be fun even with the limitations of this screen. Tiger just kind of barfed out whatever they could. There wasn't as much love or attention put into these things. Most of their games consisted of defeat this enemy until you get bored. Game & Watch games were made with so much more care and so much more love, and you can tell that with how much Nintendo cares about its legacy. In 1997, Nintendo released Game & Watch Gallery on the Game Boy. Boy, starting a series of 4 titles. Each one contained multiple remakes of Game & Watch games, both in their original forms just remade on a Game Boy screen and in modern forms, this time utilizing Mario characters and some new mechanics here and there. These modern versions do a great job contextualizing what the originals were trying to convey, even if most were fairly understandable. Some games you just said, alright. Whatever you say, Nintendo. The gallery games are great, and I recommend them to anybody who wants to try these things out. I think the modern remakes make it easier to appreciate how they were able to do these exact games with such garbage hardware. Some Game & Watch games were later re-released as mini keychain games in 1998, the Nintendo Mini Classics. Yeah, these are Game & Watch games. Mr. Game & Watch has been a staple of the Super Smash Bros. Series ever since Melee in 2001, and each of his moves reference an old-school Game & Watch title. The game Manhole was released as a card for the Game Boy Advance's e-reader. Just swipe the card to play Manhole. 2 volumes of Game & Watch collection for the Nintendo DS were released through the Club Nintendo loyalty program and included some of the multi-screen games. Not remade like in the gallery titles, just the originals. Kinda lame, but whatever. Various standard games were made available on the Nintendo DSi shop, and let's not even get into all the references Nintendo crams into their games. So much of Nintendo's core modern DNA is derived from the Game & Watch. The D-pad, dual screens, the kickstand, instant 2-player multiplayer, and weirdly enough, when you sit down and play these old Game & Watch games, you can get a whiff of that Nintendo charm, taking a simple concept and turning it into a fun and charming experience. Of course, with that being said, I don't think anybody nowadays would answer the question of, hey, do you want to play a Nintendo game with yeah, Donkey Kong 2?
I have a question. Am I considered a classic?
5 out of 5. Graphics and what have you.
That's all you do in this game!
Oh.
Hey y'all, Scott here. E3 2018, you say? Never heard of him. I'm more so interested in demonstrating the potential of hardware. Let's see if this iron passes the durability test. Gonna put that down as a TBA. Tech demos, demonstrations of hardware potential that most of the time have no business being real games. Whenever new hardware is revealed, saying it has 4 gallons of teraflops lodged in it means nothing if we can't see it getting put to good use. Developers have to cobble together something that people can look at and instantly understand just how good games can look, sound, feel, play, all that. These are some of the most interesting parts of a new console generation. These are what could be, rather than what is most of the time. I think it's fair to say the vast majority of tech demos never amount to anything and don't become full-fledged video games. They're just here to visualize a hardware's tech specs. That's not to say they can't become full games or elements from them can't be used on other games. However, developers just have a hankering to tease and decide to make tech demos that look like games people have been begging for, which can be just absolutely cruel if that game isn't actually in development. Take, for example, a Zelda tech demo for the GameCube showcasing a sword fight between Link and Ganondorf. Who's gonna win? A Zelda game for babies, that's who! We know now that The Wind Waker is a fantastic Zelda game, but back then people were expecting Zelda on the GameCube to look mature, epic, a bit dark, and they got this. People were upset because Nintendo showed them this thing they really wanted and didn't give it to them. At first. Tech demos can be pretty cool, but sometimes they end up just disappointing fans. So I will pose the question, what makes a good tech demo? Well, let's take a look at various tech demos from the past and see if we can figure that out for ourselves. Now we can't just talk tech demos and end it there. Today I am introducing the Tech Demometer, patent pending. Each tech demo we look at will be ranked on a scale of 1 to 3 based on completely inconsistent judgment. Don't overthink the ratings, let's just do it. Oh my god, are they remaking Final Fantasy VII in HD? I think they're remaking Final Fantasy VII in HD! They're remaking Final Fantasy VII in HD! This tech demo was shown off at E3 2005 as a showcase for the PlayStation 3 hardware and is a remake of the opening section of Final Fantasy VII. It's just a short clip and honestly doesn't seem that much better than something from the PlayStation 2 or Xbox at the time. Actually, let me rephrase that. Stuff like character models and overall detail in the world is definitely early PS3 quality, but nothing here screams, oh yeah, this shows the power of the PlayStation 3. It felt like a PS2 era cutscene running in real time. Impressive, but not jaw-dropping. All this did was make fans sit there and ask, so when's the Final Fantasy VII remake coming out? Tech demos don't have to become a game that actually releases commercially, but look at this and tell me, oh yeah, just a tech demo, has no business being a real game. The fact that this wasn't linked to any potential remake kinda makes me ask the question, what was the point in making this if all it did was end up disappointing fans? Sure, it makes sense to take something people are familiar with and enhance it this much to show the leap in graphical capabilities, but the way this looks and the way it's presented heavily implies this can be and should be more than a tech demo. Well, 10 years after the tech demo, a Final Fantasy VII remake was officially announced for the PlayStation 4. And just like the tech demo, nothing has happened since. It just seems like this thing has been crab walking in development hell. This tech demo did its job to excite people, but for all the wrong reasons. I don't think it got people excited for the power of the PlayStation 3, it got people excited over a game that didn't exist. Hey, Mario Kart XXL, I see this was in the era where they were naming tech demos after TV dinners. This wasn't a demo created by Nintendo, instead by Denaris Entertainment Software, somebody's favorite developer. This was an unauthorized prototype showing how the GBA could render 2 background layers at once, plus also utilizing fully rendered 3D characters. I gotta be honest, this looks pretty impressive for the Game Boy Advance. I don't think anybody knows if this was actually pitched to Nintendo at any point, but regardless, never became a game, still cool though and really seems to utilize the GBA hardware well. This is an interesting one. When the PS4 was initially revealed, this demo of an old man's face was shown, but it was at E3 2013 that a full tech demo showcasing the old man was revealed entitled The Dark Sorcerer, developed by Quantic Dream, who developed this downer of an experience, so it's surprising to see them make this tech demo that is completely self-aware and is more of a comedy. I gotta be honest, this is one of the most fun tech demos ever made. It has fun with itself and doesn't come off as teasing fans or unimpressive. It's interesting on its own, but doesn't need to be a full game. It's both a short film and a tech demo. Give this one the full points it deserves. Back when the Kinect was introduced as Project Natal, an infamous tech demo was shown alongside it, presented by Peter Molyneux himself. Project Milo, a demo that involved artificial intelligence so intelligent it was artificial. Basically, you could talk to a video game character and he'd talk right back effortlessly. Maybe a little too effortlessly.
You've got to put these goggles on.
Goggles?
Put them on like this.
Notice what she did. This wasn't acted. She felt the need to reach down.
That's because it's acted. I always had a feeling this was a bit faked. Like, have you ever used a Kinect on the Xbox 360 before? The thing had a hard time figuring out if I had a body. You're expecting me to think it could have a realistic conversation with me? Also, look how fast the Kinect scans in this piece of paper. Like, no. No, that can't be. Listen, this was and still is conceptually really cool, and the fact is there that the original concept of Kinect was much more technologically advanced than the retail product. But this is the only instance where we saw Project Milo in action, so it's hard to believe that it was really that immersive and expansive. But I'll give it 2 points for being pretty cool in the grand scheme of things, and being some pretty cool use of the hardware. Back when the Game Boy Advance was coming out, Nintendo created this demo that is a remake of Yoshi's Story on the Nintendo 64. A Nintendo 64 game running on a Game Boy Advance? Not really. Like I said, it's obviously a remake of the game that runs on the Game Boy Advance. The presentation has been downgraded a fair amount, but I gotta be honest, this is still pretty impressive. It's like how Nintendo remade Super Mario 64 on the Nintendo DS just to prove that the system can do 3D. The problem is that game is tart, while this one never came out and is just as, if not more impressive than 64 DS, just because, hey, it's basically playing a Nintendo 64 game on the hardware that preceded the DS. That's pretty cool. This never became a real-life thing, but unlike the Final Fantasy VII tech demo, this demo wasn't this big extravaganza that was a complete overhaul of how the original game was. This was just proving that the Game Boy Advance was more powerful than many may have assumed, and I think it did its job fairly well. Back when Nintendo was desperately trying to prove the Wii U gamepad's worth, E3 2014 brought with it 2 Wii U tech demos focusing on the 2-screen dynamic. One was Project Guard, a tower defense game where you had to swap between certain camera angles to stop enemies from harming your base. The other was Project Giant Robot, where you're a Project Giant Robot and you're doing specific missions in a city. Guard was turned into the game Star Fox Guard, where it was basically the same but with a Star Fox theme, and Giant Robot was never officially turned into a full game. However, it's speculated that the Nintendo Labo Robot Kit is what became of the project. I thought Guard was kind of a cute use of the gamepad, but Giant Robot always looked like a clunk fest. They worked pretty well as tech demos, but here's the problem. They came out 2 years after the console released. That definitely takes away a lot of the oomph out of a tech demo. Oh, Conker the Squirrel. Definitely at the top of everybody's top 10 alcoholic video game squirrels list is of course the star of the cult classic Nintendo 64 game Conker's Bad Fur Day. After Microsoft purchased the developer Rare, the Conker franchise hasn't been touched all too much. A remake of Bad Fur Day was thrown onto the original Xbox, but other than that, the series has remained relatively dormant. And then, yeah, Young Conker was a tech demo created to demonstrate the tech behind Microsoft HoloLens. Using augmented reality, the thing is actually quite impressive. Other than that, it's a bit of a spit in the face to Conker fans. It's one of the few representations the series has had in the past decade, and it's not at all how fans want to see this character or play something he's in. They could have built this demo around any other character or series, a series that has had more releases or support as of late. But no, make it a cult classic that fans desperately want to see return and make it an augmented reality demo. Neat. And while we're on the topic of Rare IP tech demos, what the hell was this? Taking Banjo-Kazooie and making it a motion-controlled experience? I don't know what you would call this. Mario tech demos. Let's take a look at these bad boys. Well, Mario 128 seems to be the most well-known. Made to show the power of the GameCube, the title alludes to this being a sequel to Mario 64, but after further inspection, yeah, no. Cool tech for back in the day, though. Peach's Castle was a demo, again for the GameCube, and was just a large tour of the castle. Neat. Luigi's Mansion was once used for tech demo purposes before initially being revealed as a game. You could play with Mario and Wario's face on the DS when it was initially shown. New Super Mario Bros. Me? God, I thought these tech demos were gonna be way more interesting than they turned out. Holy look at all the ping pong balls! Now I gotta get an original Xbox. What better hardware to try to prove the worth of than the Sega 32X, the 32-bit add-on for the Sega Genesis. Here's some rad 90s graphics that Sega threw out there to show just how powerful the 32X is, and whoa, this is literally just a bunch of primitive 3D junk flying at us. This demo knows how to rivet. Now you may have noticed that most of these never reach a solid 3 in the tech demometer, probably because tech demos are never meant to be perfect. They're interesting parts of history, and when new hardware is unveiled, it's cool to see what it's capable of. But it's all about the games that are, you know, actually real. After all this, what does make a good tech demo? And I think the simple answer is something that showcases a hardware's potential without toying with fans' hearts. Most of the time, tech demos aren't representative of any final product, so they can mainly be seen as harmless. They aren't like a yearbook quote which is stuck with you for life. Of course, when I was in the room with the yearbook committee, they took the last thing that I said as my yearbook quote, and when you're in a room full of weirdos, that's how you get a quote that becomes, "Stop licking my neck!"
Well, howdy. Welcome to Knives, where the selling point is sharp. We all know that humans should never leave the house without 2 visible 15 concealed blades. But what about your beloved defense pet, Sharpays, Stabberdoodles, even Calico Cat Tunnels? That's karate magic. That's why we at Knives is proudly announcing Critter Shivers, the first line of defense weaponry designed to turn your guard dog into a guard god. Lowercase g, praise be to his name. All my coins is buried, so I ain't got no need for a piggy bank. But I do loves me, the piggy shank. For just $19.99, blade up your tuskless swine with melted down, sharpened plastic toothbrushes. All lovingly crafted and tested in federal correctional facilities. Right here in the US&A. But what if all you can afford to protect your property is a ding-dang hamster? Well, say goodbye hamster wheel and hello hamster steel. Yeah! Oh, he's dizzy. It's the guinea blade. What hamsters lack in size, they make up for an unquenchable thirst for unrighteous human blood. For just $39.99. Ball not included. Don't get greedy. Yep. Now, it pains me to admit, but not all aminals are suited to knife combat. Some ain't got no hands! And that's why, for a limited time, we're proud to offer Mace. Yeah! It's pepper spray for a snake. Not today. Yeah, take it. That's a hissy fit. Oh, good thing both my eyes is plastic. If you need a little more bang for your man's best buds, get yourself a pine coneade. Prorated for squirrel and human use, I think. Oh, we lost the pen.
Tune his heart to mine.
Today on Xplay, we spoil your memories of Batman Arkham Knight with our review. And that thumping in the vents isn't a xenomorph, it's just Adam Sessler trying to escape the studio. I hope he remembers to bring his motion tracker, because it's game time. Hello and welcome to Xplay. Don't think of today's show as a slightly depressing work-from-home episode, but rather as all of us retreating to our personal Batcaves, ready to emerge with a revitalized taste for justice, improved hand-to-hand combat, and an overabundance of tank missions no one asked for. Which is coincidentally exactly what Rocksteady did with the release of Batman Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight was a huge moment for fans of Batman and plot twists that you can see from orbit, but sadly, Xplay wasn't a part of that conversation. Until now. Here's a review of Batman Arkham Knight.
In 2009, Batman Arkham Asylum caught everyone off guard by being good, like really, really ridiculously good. Arkham Asylum wowed both Bat fans and gamers with its compelling take on the Dark Knight mythos and gameplay that truly made you feel like the world's greatest detective. Developer Rocksteady only upped the ante with 2011's Arkham City. They expanded the world beyond the confines of Arkham Asylum, crafting a sprawling, thoughtful hellscape populated by some of Batman's most notable foes. Anticipation for Arkham Knight was at a fever pitch as soon as credits rolled on Arkham City. While Arkham Origins came out in the interim, it was basically treated like the Jason Todd Robin of the franchise, discarded by fans and left to die. Arkham Knight was to be the franchise's return to glory, the thrilling conclusion to Rocksteady's run on Batman. What we got wasn't quite that. It's been 6 years since the game dropped, and unfortunately, Xplay wasn't around to let you know what we thought about it. So, was Arkham Knight a victim of its own hype? Has time revealed it to be an underrated gem? Spoilers. Absolutely not. Let's get one thing out of the way. I am a massive fan of the Caped Crusader. Batman has always been one of my favorite superheroes, and I'm an avid reader of the comics. I enjoyed Asylum City, and I was even one of the 5 people who legitimately enjoyed Arkham Origins. So it's saying something that I put down Arkham Knight after only a few hours of playing it. Now I can already hear you bitching in the comments. How could you review a game you never even finished? Luckily, we have a producer who hates himself just enough to get his hands dirty so mine can stay clean. Now, Arkham Knight is a heavily flawed game, but that doesn't mean it's without its strengths. The free-flow combat established in the first 2 games feels as good as ever in Arkham Knight. Arkham Knight was the first game developed by Rocksteady to take place in an unfettered Gotham City as opposed to the confines of Arkham or a single neighborhood converted into an open-air prison. And credit where credit's due, they do a great job of bringing the city to life. The Gotham they've built is a gothic, neon-lit sprawl. Similar to web slinging in the Spider-Man game, gliding and grappling around the city is a joy unto itself. I would also be remiss if I didn't point out that the voice acting is fantastic across the board. Perpetual MVPs Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill knock it out of the park as Batman and the Joker respectively. Jonathan Banks gives a fantastic performance as Commissioner Gordon, and Troy Baker delivers a solid performance as the titular Arkham Knight. Side missions have always been a highlight of the Arkham games, and that's no different here. While some of the tasks can be repetitive, quite a few are fun. One highlight is the side quest that has you investigating a series of dead bodies strung up on walls across the city. This really gives you the sensation of being the world's greatest detective. The Meteor side missions capture what an Arkham game felt like, tracking down and bagging the known rogues of Gotham City one map objective at a time. Beyond that though, there isn't much to celebrate about the game. One of the much hyped features in Arkham Knight was the inclusion of the Batmobile. Somehow, Arkham Knight takes the iconic staple and makes it an absolute slog to use. The thing handles like it's being driven by a 16-year-old who decided to get incredibly hammered before testing for their learner's permit. You definitely need to be a few beers in before you think scaling a building in your car and platforming with it is a game mechanic anyone wants. As bizarre as some of these choices are, it would all be tolerable if the Batmobile segments were flourishes around the edge of an expertly crafted main event. But they managed to shoehorn the Batmobile into every sequence possible, most often as vehicle combat arenas. The game features a multitude of tank missions where you have to use the Batmobile's battle mode. At this point, the Batmobile ceases to be a car and becomes the Wraith tank from Halo. Anyway, the problems of Arkham Knight extend beyond the Batmobile. Arkham Knight's story is notable for asking the bold question, what if Under the Red Hood was bad? Spoiler alert for a 5-year-old game you really shouldn't play, Red Hood, aka Jason Todd, is the Arkham Knight. To say this reveal is bad is an understatement. It somehow manages to be both completely obvious, yet totally out of left field. Up until Arkham Knight, the extended Bat family hadn't really been integral to the story of the Arkham games. Jason Todd wasn't mentioned or even hinted at in the previous 2 games. The Arkham Knight reveal is not just a disappointment, but it's also completely unearned. Under the Red Hood had thematic depth and an earned sense of melancholy. You understood Jason's feelings of rage and abandonment because the comic and animated movie did a phenomenal job of weaving the story of Batman and Jason Todd through the narrative. In contrast, Arkham Knight's approach is ham-fisted, outright stupid at points. Oh look, we're getting flashbacks about a Robin we've never heard of before dying on Batman's watch. I guess I'll just take this at face value and not be waiting for that Jason guy to be alive again 5 minutes from now. That on-the-nose exposition tries to add emotional heft as quickly as possible so we can get back to the tank mission and pretty much kills the game's narrative momentum. This is even more disappointing considering the storytelling had been the highlight of the previous Arkham games. Nothing the game tries to do story-wise really works. If you dive into the main campaign missions back-to-back, Arkham Knight feels like some sort of near-future military thriller, probably with Tom Clancy's name on it. If I wanted to play a Sam Fisher game, I'd travel back in time to 2013, because that's the last time Ubisoft decided to give a damn. Between endless military grunts, Spec Ops nobodies, and the infinite tank combat, the core campaign of Arkham Knight doesn't feel like a Batman game at all, which is probably why the side missions and the city gliding were my favorite part. And when the game does focus on Batman lore, it still doesn't always get it right. Take, for instance, the Joker stuff, which is occasionally interesting, but often just weird and unnecessary. I was excited to see what Rocksteady was going to do with a post-Joker Batman, but that promise was short-lived. The events of Arkham City have left the Joker living rent-free in Batman's head. Joker talks to you incessantly throughout the campaign, proving you can have too much of a good thing. He literally has more screen